Hello, and welcome to another fashionably late episode of Liberated Panda Live with your co-host Angel and myself, Jason.
This week, we'll be discussing China's creation of its own digital currency, which is the first for a major economy. Will the cyber yuan give Beijing the power to track its citizen spending in real time? And will China be able to free its money from being linked to the dollar-dominated global financial system?
And we'll also be talking about Georgia's newly passed election bill. Angel reads the entire 98-page bill, so you don't have to. What are some of the major highlights on their new election law, and what are some of the corporate and political backlash that their politicians are experiencing?
But first, Jason and I talk about all the boycotts involving China. It seems like every week there's another boycott against something in China, or China's boycotting something. This week's no different, as Chinese consumers boycott brands critical of Xinjiang.
This time it's H&M, the international clothing brand that has angered Chinese consumers. So what H&M do this time, Angel?
All right, so H&M released a statement in September 2020 saying they were concerned about allegations of forced labor in cotton production in Xinjiang. A few months earlier than that, July of 2020, more than 175 organizations launched a campaign to persuade international brands to cut ties with suppliers tied to using forced Uyghur labor. Since 84% of cotton production from China comes from Xinjiang, 1 in 5 garments sold worldwide use forced labor. So the H&M statement that came out September 2020 was largely ignored by China at the time, but it was revived recently by the Communist Youth League, which is a Chinese Communist Party group. They posted on its official Weibo account that H&M is spreading rumors to boycott Xinjiang cotton while making a big profit in China. So this prompted Chinese e-commerce giants like Alibaba and JD to remove H&M from their online platform, which is a big hit to their bottom line, since more than 20% of China's shopping is done online. H&M stores also disappeared from online maps in China as well. So now the cotton backlash has grown to include Nike, Adidas, Burberry, Uniqlo, and Lacoste, just to name a few. However, the Chinese boycotts of goods have historically been temporary in nature, so there might not actually be any long-term consequences to these brands. And H&M has already backpedaled and issued a statement vowing to regain customers in China. Any thoughts on these new boycotts, Jason?
You're absolutely right. Boycotts are typically temporary in nature. People find creature comfort in the things that they enjoy, and they can't really get rid of them. You know, they boycott it for a couple of weeks and then they go right back. So.
Well, in other boycott news, people in some countries, I'll briefly just mention this, including the US, are calling for a boycott of the 2022 Winter Olympics in China due to their concerns over human rights abuses in Xinjiang. So, that's pretty much the big and small of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've heard a lot about the situation with the Uyghurs now in Western China, and a lot of Western nations are calling for boycotts based on that. I'm honestly surprised that it's only the boycott of the Olympics. I'm kind of surprised that there hasn't been more international pressure on that. But China has come back and said that they are going to retaliate with sanctions. So they're really taking the Olympics to a geopolitical level right now. They don't want another Russia 1980, I guess, where a lot of Western nations, I should say, boycotted the Moscow Olympics. So,
so what do you think? I mean, are you on the side of boycotting or no? Because I'm more on the side of let the athletes compete.
I'm always on the side of let the athletes compete. You should just go beat them. You know, that's the best thing. Humiliate them on home soil. I don't know what else to say. Get better. Bring better people, right?
Right. Why punish the athletes, right?
The best thing you could do for a regime like the CCP is to beat them at their own game. So beat them on their own soil, right? Have the best athletes, show that your culture, or your society at least, your form of government is better.
Right. So now we move on to our first main topic of the day, which is about China's new digital currency. So China's the first major economy to create its own digital currency, and it has some people majorly concerned. Jason has all the details for us on China's new digital currency, what it means for Chinese citizens and the global markets.
Right, and rightly so. People are concerned. Like you mentioned, Angel, China is the first country that's really looking to go almost exclusively to a digital currency. In their never-ending quest to try to supplant the US dollar as the world's reserve currency, we've seen that now for a while, they're going digital. So they recently announced plans for their new digital currency, the Yuan. Many countries are discussing something similar, and the US has been for years. The US have thrown around blockchain-based now recently dollars, but we haven't gotten there yet. So why have they decided to do this? Well, first of all, it would allow the People's Bank of China to track all transactions a lot better than they do now with paper money. China can't, they love to track everything and everyone. So that's an easy mark there. Secondly, a lot of Chinese use Alipay and WeChat Pay, and there are concerns from the Chinese government that if something were to happen to those two private companies, that they were to that there could be some economic issues. So they wanted to, quote, compete with them by offering something that's based from the government to kind of prevent issues. I don't fully buy that. And then also thirdly, it would really increase their monitoring, not just domestically, but worldwide. And it would really weaken like the Western-based SWIFT system of transferring money internationally.
So what's the Western-based SWIFT system? Can you just briefly explain that?
It's just a money transferring system that goes through banks, like your wire system. Whenever you hear about wiring money, it's the international, I guess they're treaties, the international system that's used for it. I'm not very familiar with the SWIFT system, to be honest. I don't wire a lot of money.
It's dollar-based, right, though?
What's that?
It's dollar-based, right?
The dollar is a U.S. reserve currency. I think they said 88% of international transactions are done in U.S. dollars. So the Yuan only uses, I think, 4% of international transactions. So you could see where that would, anything that would increase their international clout would greatly kind of cut down on American and Western policies, at least in their opinion. So I'm going to quote a CNBC article here I recently read. The People's Bank of China says agencies operating digital yuan services should submit transaction data to the central bank via asynchronous transmission on a timely basis. So it would allow the PBOC to keep track of any necessary data to crack down on money laundering and criminal offenses. So I'm going to put all that in quotation marks because what's a criminal offense to maybe a certain regime, right, might be a freedom that another country enjoys. So like freedom of speech that we have in the United States or freedom to criticize the government, that would be a criminal offense to China. So it's not just cracking down on what Americans see as criminal actions and money laundering. It's cracking down on whatever that regime wants to be cracked down on. So how would it work? A lot of questions on it. So a lot like paper money that's done via done on apps and stuff. It would be pretty similar to that. You download a wallet, like if anybody has a cryptocurrency wallet, or I know some banks offer digital wallets where you can just open up a QR code and just pay for stuff. QR is like the weird barcode technology. I don't really have a QR code on me. But they're kind of personalized for your wallets, and it would allow you to pay at different kiosks or businesses just by scanning your phone, like, whoop, done. And so the currency would originally be distributed by the People's Bank of China to commercial banks, which would then accept exchanges from the fiat currency, so paper and coinage. And they've already started trials with it, too. They've given away millions in places like Shenzhen to see how people use it, to see how user-friendly it is. And right now, that they are using payments via QR codes, but they have there are some people who have noted that could be some concerns for some smaller banks in China and businesses that can't accept that. So, I mean, it's tough to go to get rid of paper money in the U.S., right? Imagine how it would be in less in a country like China where you also have non-urban people living that might not have access to as much technology. That'd really be difficult. So one of the benefits of it, though, too, is it would allow money to cross borders in basically real time. So it would really take away like the middleman, like financial institutions and stuff.
Mm.
And then obviously, the government has a lot of control of it. So one thing that they've looked at already is handing out money and then saying, I need you to spend it by Friday. This is an economic stimulus. Need it done this week. Go to McDonald's, buy 50 Big Macs. I don't care what you do. And they can actually shut it off. But with that, I'm sure what they could do is they could say, you can only buy 10 Big Macs. You have to buy fries too. So then they're going to basically force your spending habits. So, I mean,
yeah,
I can see both sides of that. And honestly, that's really scary.
right. So I find that aspect of this whole thing the most fascinating. The fact that the government can essentially put an expiration date on what like when you can use your money, which would force you as a consumer to use your money, use it or lose it. So it's better to buy something than nothing, right? So
right. So let's look at it on a really big picture, okay? Let's say the government wants to force you to not save any retirement, right? Because they want you to be completely dependent on them. Something we talk about a lot here in the US. We talk about government dependency. Republicans don't like it. Democrats, some people say they like it more than Republicans. Republicans hate it. So let's say people were saving for retirement and they wanted to save money, or even a daughter's wedding, right? Or a son's wedding. And they wouldn't be able to save money because the government would basically say, we don't want you saving. We don't, so you're not allowed to save money. People in your town or with your ethnicity are not allowed to save money. So you need to spend it. So any money that you were to make, you would have to spend it, or else it's gonna sundown whenever they get rid of it, whenever it's in your wallet too long. So that's
right.
really scary because that's even worse than just getting rid of your money has an expiration date, or you can only spend money on healthy foods because you're overweight. It's scary.
Right. So I guess so what you're saying is like a hypothetical, right?
Totally hypothetical,
yeah.
but logical ends. It's perfectly possible.
Right.
And we've seen stuff like that too. So nobody should think that it can't happen.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's also kind of bizarre. Well, not bizarre. I think it's actually kind of like smart of them to do this, because then they can completely control the economy, right? If they want the economy to be like run hot, they can do that. And if they need to slow it down, they can also do that. So in a way, it's kind of ingenious.
It is. And because, well, they are the first, they're not the last. Like I said, the US has been talking about a digital currency as well. With the advent of blockchain technology, that's really kind of taken it over. If you remember on one of our earlier episodes, we talked about NFTs and Bitcoin and blockchain. Basically, blockchain is like a ledger, kind of like a checkbook, where each line is written, whoever kind of touches it. So each transaction builds off the last. So it's very traceable. It's actually, Bitcoin's public. There's companies out there that track Bitcoin transactions, but it is somewhat anonymous because you have your individual wallet. So you are just a wallet address. You're not really a name. Now, the nice thing about that blockchain is that allows that to occur. And when it's brought up that the US might switch to a blockchain based, that's seen as something that's very safe, and they could really go after and prevent crime and corruption and stuff. This new Chinese digital currency is not going to be on blockchain, which is a very interesting point. I don't know if that's possibly going to change, but it's going to be, I guess, based on their central bank servers, and it's not. I worry that this is gonna. They say that they're not going to just release it kind of willy-nilly, but already been busted for supposedly manipulating their currency by the Trump administration, right?
Right.
This is just another way to do it. I mean, you're looking, so like I said earlier, they only account for 4% of international financial transactions with the yuan right now.
Right.
So by using digital currency, making it easier for international transactions, they're looking to increase that, which is a huge issue for the U.S. government for obvious reasons. Think about it. One of our biggest tools in fighting, I know they always talk about the war on terrorism and stuff, but fighting different governments and stuff is that we are able to put sanctions on. We can sanction governments, sanction banks, sanction people because of that inability to move funds around with the SWIFT system. I mean, the U.S. government basically fought the Swiss bank system and said, like, you know, we have tax dollars in there. You can't have completely anonymous accounts. And they don't anymore because of the U.S. government. Yeah. So this is not good for the U.S. I mean, you know, theoretically it's not good. But China has to play this the right direction because it could go south for them too.
That's true. And like Yellen, right? She's pretty concerned about this as well. From what
they are concerned. I know one Biden administration official has previously said that this would be a Chinese digital currency would be like a warhead. Maybe not a nuclear one, but a warhead. But I don't know how. I see where the concern is. Obviously, there's great concern, but I think that the opposite end of the spectrum is that if they don't happen to play their cards right and give a system out there that people can see, that's transparent, other countries aren't going to want to use it. So individuals might use it, right? We talk about, like, let's say the Chinese government has a lot of projects in, pick an African country, Angola, right? Angola, I know they have some port projects, I think, in the One Belt, One Road. So let's say the people of Angola start using it. Well, the Angolan government might start using it, but they might say, you know, the Chinese central bank has all of our information everywhere. This really isn't safe for me because it's not decentralized, or at least it's not private enough. So we can't really use this. So individuals can use it, but they can use it much like maybe how they use Bitcoin now or Ethereum or one of the other cryptocurrencies. So that's somewhere where I could see that it could be a negative, that, you know, the Chinese Communist Party is basically going to be able to put their political will and use that as another tool to spy on other countries' financial transactions and stuff. And that's not really, I honestly, if you are a nation, that really doesn't as an individual or as a group at all, in my opinion.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see where this all leads to, right? So we'll be keeping an eye on that.
We'll see. And it'll be great, though, to see the U.S.'s response as well. You know, are we going to bring out, they talk about the digital dollar all the time. I hear about it at least every couple of months. Are we going to bring out a digital dollar? How's it going to be done? Is it going to be blockchain based? Is it not? Is it this? Is that? You know, there's other systems out there too, but just throwing it out there because blockchain is very popular. But, you know, the CCP is trying to exert its control in financial markets, and they've already started some propaganda out there. There's apparently an English language animated cartoon where a man in an American flag shirt gets knocked out by a golden coin depicting the digital yuan. So
interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, like, this is all fascinating. But I do want to get to the second topic of the day, right, Jason?
Mm-hmm. Yep, the Georgia election law. Yep. Finally, you're going to tell us about the bill that was just passed. So what's in it? Because you read it. Why are people upset? We'll go over that and some of the corporate and political fallout, which there is a lot, apparently.
Yeah, so very controversial law. So thank you, Jason. So I went through this Georgia's 98-page voting law bill that the Republicans passed and signed last week. So why is Georgia in particular important? So if you recall, President Biden won Georgia by just 11,779 votes out of nearly 5 million votes cast. So the new law limits ballot access for voters in Georgia in booming urban and suburban counties and they typically vote Democrat. So Jason, do you want to tell us why you think this new election law was passed in Georgia specifically?
Right. So we saw with the general election, Republicans had a lot of issues with how that was handled. We saw that there was in Cobb County, which is right outside of Atlanta. Cobb County and Fulton County make up the majority of the Atlanta metro area. I believe it was Cobb County. There was a pipe burst in the middle of the night, and then votes came in. I guess there were videos. There was a lot of stuff that did not look above board. That's not, I can just see what's out there. They've determined that everything was fine. Numbers look, I don't know, numbers don't look right. But there was a lot of concern by a lot of Republicans. Donald Trump raised a lot of concerns. And then some of the similar patterns, data patterns, were repeated in their special election in early January. I believe it was the 4th. And that concerned a lot of people. And they got a lot of publicity for it. And the Republican governor didn't like it, and the Republican Senate and Republican House there obviously wanted to do something about it. So this is kind of their response to it. Apparently, it's not as aggressive as the House and Senate in a state wanted it to be, but it is, and it's not as aggressive as a lot of election laws out there. To be honest, pretty watered down. So, what are some of the highlights?
So, yeah, let's go through the highlights in order of what I find them to be the most substantive and important to the least. And this is just my personal opinion. So first, Georgia voters will now have less time to request absentee ballots. Absentee ballots are just mail-in ballots. So FYI, for those of you that don't know, Georgia decreased the amount of time someone can request an absentee ballot by half the period from nearly 6 months before an election to less than 3. So that's number one.
But is that from previous? Is that from just this year's election, or is that from previous election too? Okay.
Just this year. And then second, there are now strict new ID requirements for mail-in ballots. And I just want to clarify that there's a misconception that this new law imposes a new ID requirement for in-person voting, but that's not accurate. I believe a person always had to show their ID for in-person voting in Georgia. This change should only affect mail-in ballots and absentee ballots. So the new law requires that a person sign their mail-in ballot, and that was all they had to do originally. And then now they have to also include information such as their state-issued ID number, digits of their social security number, their birthday. So all of that extra requirement, people or critics are afraid that this will increase the amount of mail-in ballots that will be rejected for people's failure to complete all the required steps. Yes, Jason, you're laughing. Why is that?
I'm laughing because the idea that somebody can't correctly put in their driver's license number is a concern, that people think that the average individual is not bright enough to enter your driver's license or ID card number. And I know that there are issues with language differences and stuff, but that's many states allow ballots to be cured and ballots to be checked. In those cases, the ballots aren't just discarded. Ballots are kept to be verified, and if the election is close, they normally verify them. So I don't know if that's in the bill, but I got to be honest with you, I don't really see that as much of a concern.
So that is in the new. So thank you for mentioning that. That is in the new law. So they shortened the amount of time that you're allowed to cure the ballots, but but it still can be cured.
Ballot curing though has typically been considered a very gray area, since it is after the election, attempting to get mistakes remedied. So ballot curing is a very gray area for a lot of people, and even legally. So this actually legalizes ballot curing, right? Which is a win for the Democrats out there that typically like ballot curing more.
Right. So I mean, it's just a new limitation. I don't know if it's like good or bad, and I don't want to make that judgment, but critics obviously think it's bad. But moving on to the next highlight. Third, we have drop boxes where you can drop off your ballot. So this still exists under this new law, but barely. So for the 2020 election, there were 94 drop boxes across the 4 counties that Jason mentioned that are in Atlanta that's more like made up of more Democrats. And this new law limits the drop boxes to 23. So it went from 94 to 23. Fourth, the new law imposes early voting restrictions in connection with the open voting hours in certain areas of Georgia, which is likely to decrease voting access for Georgians who work daytime hours or who have less flexible schedules. Fifth, offering food or water to voters waiting in line now, it risks misdemeanor charges. So the new law bars third-party groups or anyone who's not an election worker from providing food and water to voters waiting in line. And long lines in Georgia are an unfortunate reality. And they're often found in poorer areas, densely populated communities that tend to vote Democrat. During the primary election last June, the temperatures were over like 80 degrees with high humidities. So voters had to wait like between like 2 to 6 hours to vote. Six, if you go to the wrong polling place, it will be even harder to vote. So from 2012 to 2018, Georgia shuttered more than 214 voting precincts around the state. So those changes confused many voters who showed up to the wrong precinct and had to vote with provisional ballots. There are so many other provisions that I want to cover, but there's just not enough time. Mm-hmm. So Jason, aren't there technical provisions of this law too?
Yeah, I think that there's technical provisions of the new law that are just difficult to explain, like the Republicans stripping away power from the Secretary of State, shifting the power to the legislature, which is now controlled by Republicans, which created a new chair of the state election board. But that's consistent with a lot of states. Election law does house with the state legislatures. It always has. It's in the Constitution that way. And actually, this past election, we got in a lot of infighting. Pennsylvania is a good example, where there was you had a Republican House, a Republican legislature, and a Democratic Secretary of State, and they butted heads based on voting and election laws and who should make the laws. But I mean, it's pretty clear in the Constitution. So to me, that's just kind of verifying that because they weren't happy with, I believe, his name Rafflesberger's execution of voting law issues. Another thing that's interesting, the food and water, most states have rules like that. In fact, almost all of them do. It's about coercion with voters, right? Like you're not supposed to stand X amount of feet with any a Biden flag or a Trump hat on. You
Right.
just can't do that stuff because you're not allowed to poll at the polling place. I'll see a table set up for a guy running for school board, for example, 100 yards from the entrance to the polling site. That's how it is. That's why you see those lines of flags at the beginning of the parking lot. If you guys go vote and you notice that. We've always had restrictions on that. That's pretty common. This is just kind of codifying it. So,
right. And so that's the argument that a lot of people on the other side are making. They're just saying like these laws aren't very radical, right? That like they're just commonsensical changes to the voting laws. So there's two sides to it, and both have valid points. Mm-hmm. So there's also been backlash from corporate America due to this new Georgia law, right, Jason?
Yes, Major League Baseball was scheduled to have their All-Star game in Cobb County, right outside of Atlanta, at the new Braves Stadium. They have released a letter specifically citing Joe Biden's and the Biden administration's stance on these new Georgia voter laws and saying that they will be removing the games from the Braves, moving them. They just announced they're moving them to Denver, Colorado. Atlanta has, and even Stacey Abrams came out and said that it's very disappointing that they moved them. Atlanta is a majority minority city, like a lot of cities in America. And there's a lot of African-American owned businesses now. They say it's going to take, I think, $100 million out of the local economy. Like that seems to me that you're saying that you're disenfranchising minority voters. But here, let's take some money out of your pockets too. Like that's insult to injury. And in my opinion, it's completely unnecessary, especially when, like you mentioned, Angel, this law really, it's not extreme whatsoever. It's not extreme. It's pretty run of the mill. It could be a lot more extreme, to be honest.
Right. So, well, some would argue that it's not like that extreme, right? And then you have critics that argue it is really extreme. So, like you have both sides. And then on top of MLB, right, you have Coca-Cola and Delta, and both of them, I believe, are Atlanta-based as well.
They are both headquartered in Atlanta as well.
Right. So they've come out and criticized this as well. But the MLB is the only company so far that has put their money where their mouth is, right?
Right. And it'll be interesting to see, though, at the state legislature, because Delta is headquartered at Atlanta Airport. So it'll be interesting to see if the state legislature possibly pulls some funding from them. I know that's always a talk when companies say stuff like this.
Right. Right. It's interesting to note that neither Coke or Delta has committed itself to withdrawing financial support from state legislatures who perpetrated this voting bill. So it's kind of hypocritical to me, or like it's empty words, at least.
Yeah, they're always empty words.
So except for the MLB, right? But finally,
I don't know. I think that there was another reason for that. I don't see why they would do it. It makes no sense.
Yeah, maybe.
I think they committed too far, and they had to, poop or get off the pot, as the idiom likes to say. You got to either do it or you got to back down, and it was too public at that point because they were the first ones to really come out.
Right. So yeah, we really don't know what their motivations were for moving. Like you said, there could be other reasons why they're moving as well. Like, who knows, right? In addition to corporate backlash, there's been political backlash to the corporate backlash. So do you want to tell us about that?
Well, just a lot of politicians have come out, criticizing these corporations for it, for obvious reasons. A lot of Americans have too. Stacey Abrams, the Democrat, what do you want to call her? Democrat
leader. She's like
she's not a politician, but she ran for governor of Georgia. She's big with the Democratic Party nationally. A national voice, I guess, or voice for the Democratic Party in Georgia. She even came out criticizing Major League Baseball for it.
She did. Yeah, she did. But she also said that she understood why they made the decision that they made. So,
I mean, at that point, you can't. How could she sit there and say, I disagree with the voter law, but I disagree with them moving the game, without giving a caveat at the end but I understand why they did it. Like, she knows too. She's like, man, that was not good.
Right. I mean, she's obviously disappointed at the loss of revenue that, the MLB leaving.
And she should be.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a huge loss to Georgia. And you're right. It does punish the residents of Georgia more than the politicians, really, or maybe equally punishing both. So
it punishes the minority business owners and those people who would be working that game from getting extra money, either extra wages through whatever, or having their companies are more successful, event hosting companies, stuff like that. It really punishes that. Small businesses, medium-sized businesses,
right?
They're going to feel the brunt of that. Of what the loss would have been, let's say. Right.
And then I guess the last thing I want to mention is just Mitch McConnell. What was his reaction to this whole thing? Because I thought it was really funny.
You tell me, because I did not see it.
Oh, so he was
I steer clear away from cocaine, Mitch.
Really? Okay. Are you not a fan of Mitch?
Mitch McConnell is one of the greatest politicians of our generation, but he's a pure politician.
Yes.
Love him or hate him, he's fantastic. But I just get annoyed with him.
Yes, he's a genius politician. Not to
he's
say
incredible.
Right. Not to say we love him, but he's just like a robot politician that is just
he knows.
He knows how.
He knows how to extract his pound of flesh from every situation, as they like to say. Right. He knows how to get his little share to pass a bill. Like what they say, the checks or whatever. How he was for the checks, and then he's like, you know what? No, I'm not. Because he knew that if he could stall it, he could get a concession in there.
Right. So Mitch McConnell just came out and criticizing corporate America, saying that that there will be revenge for any corporation that comes out and tries to bring negative light to this or criticize this new election law. But then he also was like, but we'll still take your money. So I just thought that was funny.
Obviously, he's a politician.
Yeah, right.
But it will be interesting, though, to see, like, will the Georgia state legislature, because there is a lot of funding that goes to Atlanta to keep their headquarters there and to keep Atlanta as their major hub at Delta. You know, what happens from there? You know, do they take some funding away? Do they not? It'd be really interesting to see how that works out.
Yeah, he says he's going to punish those companies. So we'll see.
To be determined.
To be determined, right? So that's all the time that we have for today. You know, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, go to our Twitter. It's at Liberated _Panda, or just leave a comment on our YouTube. Jason, any last words?
I hope everybody has a great week. I know it's warming up down here in Texas, and, you know, spring has been sprung.
Yes. Yeah. And we kind of got the COVID vaccines like going under control and everything. So yes, we're in a positive mood and feeling good. So hopefully you guys will join us next week right here on Liberated Panda Live, 6 p.m. Wednesday.
All right.
Bye,
see you guys. Thanks for tuning in.